Welcome back to the channel, everybody. Today I'm going to take you back to 1979 to review the 1979 top set while also talking about the 1979 baseball season. I completed this set approximately about 20 years ago, so at the time I wasn't as concerned about condition, but I think as I got lots, most of them are in fairly good condition. Well, as always, we'll kind of go through some of the star players, point those out to you, and talk about some of the sub-issues that are within the set itself. All right, so starting with the 1979 set, it leads off with the league leader cards. So it features the league leaders from the previous season. So we have the batting leaders with Carew and Parker on there, home run leaders with Foster and Rice. Here we got Foster and Rice again on the RBI leaders. I believe they both were MVPs that season, if I'm not mistaken. Going all the way down to the victory leaders, we have Perry and Guidry. Strikeout leaders, we have Richard and Ryan. Save leaders, we go down a little bit further, we have Gossage and Fingers. The basic card design, as you can see featured in the corner here, is going to have the team name here on like a little ribbon beneath the player's name with the Topps emblem featured within inside of baseball, which I think is kind of a cool design feature of these cards, followed by a picture image. Typically it's going to be a portrait or an action image for most of these players. There's a few other subsets in here, also kind of an interesting error that we'll talk about. Let's kind of get started as I'll talk about the season as well. All right, so obviously within the 70s, you have the bright uniform designs. You have like those softball style sort of uniforms that you saw popular through about the early parts to the mid 80s before they started switching back to more traditional design. But by this time, pretty much every team had a uniform like this, except for a few exceptions, like the New York Yankees. You can see here pictured down below had more of a traditional type of uniform. All right, so the 79 season, your World Series champions for that year were the We Are Family Pirates. Your MVP from that World Series was Willie Stargell, who was also the National League MVP. It was kind of his last hurrah as a really big ball player at that time. And they won in 7 games over the Baltimore Orioles, who fell short of the World Series, who then won the World Series again in 1983, 4 years later, and hasn't won a World Series since. Our All-Star cards are going to be a little bit different, so it's not a sub-issue like many of the sets in the late 70s. They have the All-Star emblem on top of the name here, so it's kind of built within the card. So we have Joe Morgan, still with the Reds by the time this card was pictured. We have Paul Molitor, Hall of Famer, Steve Carlton. I would say that 79 is one of my favorite designs from the late 70s. I just think it's very simple, and I like that it has a lot of portraits, which are kind of by preference, unless they have a really cool action image. And I think the action photography from the 70s just wasn't quite there for me yet to really kind of capture the play on the field in the ways that we kind of see in cards that came in subsequent decades. Here we have Dave Winfield. He was our RBI leader that season. All right, so as I mentioned, the 2 teams that made the World Series, we actually had 2 other playoff teams because we were clearly in the divisional era by this point. And we had the Cincinnati Reds, who were able to make the playoffs but lost to the Pirates. And we also had the California Angels reach the playoffs but fell short, obviously, of not making the World Series. So it was another one of those teams where Ryan fell short after he left the Mets and got close of getting to the World Series a few times, but fell short. We have Dale Murphy, 2-time MVP, Dennis Eckersley, MVP. The managers are going to be featured within the team cards themselves. So here's Gene Mauch with the Minnesota Twins at this point. Let's move through here quick. We have Steve Garvey. One of my favorite cards. I think this was one of my earlier purchases from a card from the 70s was this 1979 Steve Garvey. Just thought it was cool with the All-Star part on there. That's really attracted me to these cards at this time. We got Pops up here in the corner. Those all yellow uniforms with the black piping. Nothing says 70 more to me than the Pirates uniforms from that era. So interesting thing about Joe Niekro, he led the National League in wins that year, but he also was tied in National League wins that year with his brother Phil Niekro. I mean, it's got to be the first and only time that will ever happen in baseball history, but who knows? They both won, I think, 21 games, if I'm not mistaken. So this set's known for like one major rookie card. It would be Ozzie Smith's rookie card, but there's also a Bump Willis rookie in here. The error is that because he was actually featured in a Rangers uniform, but on some of the cards it says Blue Jays beneath there. So that's an error that you can find that's a pretty common error. I think the Blue Jay card goes for a little bit more than the Rangers card, but it's kind of an interesting card to be able to pick up. I'd say the major issue with these cards is going to be centering, because the Topps quality control at this time wasn't very good. They didn't have any competition to really push them to be better. Here we got Joe Torre, here pitcher with the Mets. which I think was kind of something that they were doing pretty well by the late 60s by and large and early 70s, and it just kind of really fell off as we got into the late 70s into the early 80s until they had competition again. I'm trying not to miss any big names. Here, Robin Yount right in the middle here. No Mustache Yount, which I think is kind of funny. Same thing with No Mustache Schmidt. I think it looks wrong. I got Tom Seaver up in the corner. As I mentioned before, my favorite pitcher from this era. Vida Blue, the Giants here. Nolan Ryan and Ozzie Smith. It's funny how they're back-to-back in the set. These are probably the two biggest cards in the set. My Ryan, you can see, is completely off-center, even though it's got really good corners, but it's okay top to bottom, but it's really bad side to side. Same thing with the Ozzie Smith. In fact, it could have come off the same cutting sheet for all we know, because the centering's just as poor on both cards. It's funny to see Bud Harrelson with anybody but the Mets, but there he is up there. We got Lou Whitaker. It was also a card I got very early on when I was a kid. Someone I think needs to be reconsidered for the Hall of Fame, in my opinion. Hopefully some point he'll get in there. Jim Cott, got in the Hall of Fame recently. All right, Dwight Evans. Good looking card there of him. Pretty good Yankee right there, Roy White. I got Mickey Lolich, who looks funny in a Padres uniform. I think this one is actually taken at Yankee Stadium of all places, but I could be kind of wrong. It might be Shea Stadium because it doesn't look like it's an airbrushed image of him. And the Padres obviously wouldn't have done interleague play at that point, so I think it might be Shea there, but it looks a little odd. We got Don Sutton. No, I think I moved that one a little too quickly. Kim Boyer managing the Cardinals. That's pretty cool. Ron Say. Johnny Bench. Pretty cool looking card right there. I think any bench card is cool. So then we have record breakers from 1978 that are featured in here. Probably the biggest one of this group would be the Pete Rose, where he had the National League record for most consecutive games batting safely during that year. Doesn't look like any big records fell during that time frame, but there you go. Other big names would be Guidry and Richards that are featured on here. Got Larry Bowa's All-Star card. El Presidente, Denny Martinez. Willie McCovey back with the Giants by this point. Got good old Don Zimmer featured there. One of my White Sox favorite pitchers, Wilbur Wood, during that era. They started wearing these uniforms that were modeled after uniforms they worn at the previous turn of the century, which I thought was an interesting thing that Bill Veeck brought to the team. Some other stuff about the sets itself. So you can buy these, when they came out, they were in wax packs, cellos, rack packs, and vending boxes. Obviously, the vending boxes weren't something that was openly available to the public, but you could still like find them from time to time. Pretty expensive, obviously, so they're not necessarily inexpensive to be able to pick up unopened. These were also this was the last set where you could see cards for Lou Brock, a part of a record breaker card in 1980, but also Thurman Munson, who unfortunately died unexpectedly on August 2nd, 1979, and then they honored him in 1979 on August 3rd at Yankee Stadium. We got Rich Goose Gossage. Steve Stone with the White Sox. Shortly before he won the Cy Young Award with, I believe, the Baltimore Orioles the following year. Rick Russell was your National League rookie, or not, sorry, I'm thinking Rick Sutcliffe was your National League Rookie of the Year with the Dodgers. Here's Rick Russell's card now. Good old Chuck Tanner, who's the coach of the White Sox, but also was the manager of the team that won the World Series that year. Got Jack Morris, so Willie Randall. Good old Tommy John. Sparky Anderson. All right, so your MVPs for this year were Don Baylor for the Angels. He won the MVP that year, leading them to a playoff appearance. Willie Stargell, as I mentioned earlier, but he also was co-MVP that year with Keith Hernandez of the St. Louis Cardinals. That was when he was still at the Cardinals before he went over to the New York Mets, a team he's probably more closely associated with. Your Cy Young Award winners were Mike Flanagan with Baltimore and Bruce Sutter with the Cubs. And I already mentioned your Rookie of the Year for the National League, but the Rookie of the Year for the American League, we had a tie there too. We have John Castino with the Twins, a player not really familiar with, and Alfredo Griffin for the Blue Jays. All right. Moving along. Clearly, by this time, you have some of the stars still left from the 60s, late 60s mostly. Stars of the 70s are featured throughout, and some of the stars that you'll see later on in the 80s are featured in this set as well. You got Bobby Bonds. Beautiful Rod Carew. It's one of my favorite Carew cards. Bobby Cox is the manager for the Braves. His first stint with the Braves when they didn't win. Got Burke Bryleven. Carly Yastrzemski. I definitely have some cards ready for upgrades, and that would definitely be one of them in this set. Next to Gaylord Perry. Old Cesar Cooper, pretty good player in his time. George Brett. Jim Palmer. Kind of a cool image of him on the mound getting ready to throw a pitch. Dawson. Alan Trammell down in the corner, still a pretty young ball player by this point. So here's that Bump Willis card. So here's with the Rangers. If it had Blue Jays, that would be the air. This is the corrected one. Dave Kingman, who's your National League home run leader. Your American League home run leader was Gorman Thomas with the Brewers. Your average leaders were Fred Len in the American League and Keith Hernandez, who I mentioned earlier in the National League. And your RBI leaders were Don Baylor and Dave Winfield. I mentioned your NL wins leaders, but your win leader for the American League was Mike Flanagan as well. There's Gorman Thomas actually right down there. So you have your home run leaders on the same page. Raleigh Fingers up here in the corner. Good old Al Oliver. Someone else I think should be reconsidered for the Hall of Fame. Jim Rice. Beautiful card of Jim Rice there. Here's one of the subsets you have featured in here. So the all-time record holders throughout baseball history for, I believe it's featuring season and career were the two things that were highlighted. It'd be kind of interesting to see which things are still current as of today. So maybe I'll kind of do that as we go through here. Your hit leaders at this time were, for career, it was Cobb, and season was Sisler. Now it would be Ichiro, and it would be Rose if this card was redone today. RBI leaders, Hack Wilson's still the all-time leader there. Hank Aaron's still the all-time leader as well. Home run leaders, that would change, of course. We would have Barry Bonds would be honored there, and also Barry Bonds for single season too. Batting average, Hornsby and Cobb. Somebody's not going to get those. Those are set. Your stolen base leader for season and career was Brock, but now it would be Ricky Henderson, who also debuted during this season. So it was his very first season. He was featured on a card the next year. Wins leader, single season. We have Jack Chesbro and Cy Young. Those things have not changed. Strikeout leaders, single season and career would be Ryan and now Ryan. And your earned run leaders have not changed for career. It would be Leonard, Dutch Leonard, your first Dutch Leonard, and Walter Johnson. And we got Ken Griffey. Just love the simple design here. Got Dave Parker. Frank White, I think another guy also needs to be reconsidered for the Hall of Fame. Let's see what else we got here. Good old Dave Concepcion down here. I don't know if this is the same Bruce Bochy that I'm kind of thinking about this managing now. I think there might have been 2 guys that may have shared that name at that time, but I could be wrong. Feel free to add things in the comments. I could be wrong. Whitey Herzog, who we lost recently. Bruce Sutter, your Cy Young Award winner. Also before he had his facial hair that he's kind of known for. Good old Craig Nettles. I think another guy that should be reconsidered for the Hall of Fame. Reggie Smith, a very good hitter in his era. Bob Gritch, who I think at some point will get in there. His numbers, I think, are comparable with other Hall of Famers. Good old Fred Lynn. Bucky frickin' Dent. Tony Perez is an Expo, which I always think looks interesting. Good old Guidry, who was really at the top of his game during this era. Ted Simmons. Mario Mendoza, the Mendoza line named after him. Good old Jack Clark down here. Davey Johnson still as a player. Ken Holtzman, who we lost recently. Here's Gary Carter. Tommy Lasorda with the Dodgers. Greg Luzinski. Sorry about the squeaking on that one. Fergie Jenkins. Near the end of his career. It's the Cubs manager card. Cubs team card where they only have these heads. They did that throughout the whole decade. I'm not sure exactly why. They look so different than the other ones. George Brett, other kin. Ed Ott, who passed away not too long ago. We got Dusty Baker. Louis Tiant. Good old Hal McRae down here. All right, some other things that happened during 1979 of interest here. So your team that led the league in attendance with an average of just over 35,000 was the Dodgers. But also in California, a team that was worst in attendance with under 4,000 fans a game was the Oakland A's, which is interesting because they came off those 3 World Series titles early in the decade. But by that time, the fans were pretty upset with them because they de-invested in a lot of their stars as Finley was selling them off at that point. And it was before they started getting a little bit better again, not really reaching the heights they did previously until they came later in the 80s under La Russa and also under a different owner. I think Finley may have still been the owner of the team at this time. Other things are kind of known. So I mentioned the no-hitter, the only one that was pitched that year, but we also had a game that had a score of 23-22 when the Cubs beat the Phillies at Wrigley Field. I believe Dave Kingman hit 3 home runs during that game. It's definitely a pretty famous game. You can also find times, I think you still find that on YouTube if you wanted to watch it. It's a pretty crazy game, just seeing all the runs scored that day. At the time, it set the record for the most home runs in a game by combined teams. It might still stand to this day, I'm not sure. But I think a lot of people know that John Elway was drafted during this season to play baseball. Obviously went back to college and was later drafted to play in the NFL, but he's not the only Hall of Fame quarterback that was drafted during this year to play baseball, but then went on to go to college and end up playing in the NFL. Dan Marino was also drafted during this time, I believe by the Kansas City Royals. We had 3,000 hits reached by both Lou Brock and Carl Yastrzemski, and Brock also broke the National League all-time steal record, which was set by Billy Herman, who's a player who played parts of the previous century. So he was like the all-time stolen base leader by the time he retired. He eclipsed Cobb and also Billy Herman. Here we got Phil Necro, George Foster, good old Rick Monday, Dick Williams, Hall of Fame manager, managing the Expos at this time, Mike Schmidt. One of my star cards are not in the best condition, so definitely set at some point. I probably could easily upgrade by getting some better looking cards of the stars. I don't think it would take too much to do though. Bob Lemon, Hall of Fame pitcher, managing the Yankees at this time, just came off of the 1978 World Series championship. Got Don Baylor, your MVP. Getting near the end here, we got Eddie Murray, second year card for him. Lou Piniella. Pete Rose. Lou Brock, second to last. Or the last card, actually, last playing day card. Catfish Hunter. Carlton Fisk. Ron Schuler, who went into management with the White Sox after he was a great player for them. Earl Weaver. Doc Ellis. Keith Hernandez, who I mentioned earlier in this. And Reggie Jackson is the last solo player image. And then we have a bunch of rookie cards. They had 3 black and white photos featuring the rookies at that time. There are no real big ones in here, but I can mention maybe some of the players that are kind of note as we go through here. But there's not many. That's kind of the one thing about this set, is that the rookies are pretty lacking outside of Ozzie Smith. Alfredo Griffin was the tied with the American League Rookie of the Year at that point, as I mentioned earlier. Here's his rookie card. Ned Yost, who's no more as a manager. Danny Darwin, who was part of the trade that brought John Smoltz to the Atlanta Braves from the Detroit Tigers organization. All right. Pedro Guerrero was kind of one of note. There's the Bruce Bochy I'm thinking of. There's your Hall of Fame Bruce Bochy. Looked pretty funny right there, right? Tony Smith had a pretty long career. Yogi's son Dale. And that's just about it. Kind of rounding out the set. No other kind of big names kind of noted on the last couple cards here. So I hope you guys enjoyed this. That is kind of a recap of the 1979 season and the 1979 set.